So the Buddha had some interesting and valuable advice to converts from other religions. So we'll go over some of that now, which I think you'll find very useful. Hey folks, so I'm Doug Smith. I'm study director at the Secular Buddhist Association. That's secularbuddhism.org. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're interested in helping to promote a wiser and a kinder and a less stress-filled world, both for yourself and for everyone else, consider subscribing to the channel, because we'll be going over issues about that having to do with early Buddhism and secular Buddhism and related kinds of topics. So the Buddha had some kind of surprising advice to people who would convert to Buddhism or to him as a teacher. But first, let's take a minute to consider how the Buddha tended to approach people who didn't agree with him, people who believed in other philosophies or other what we would call now religions. Now, of course, this is all material from the Pali Canon, the earliest existent evidence from the Buddha's lifetime. And while, of course, we can't assume that that's entirely accurate as far as the Buddha himself was concerned as a person, Siddhartha Gautama, nevertheless, we may say, look, this is how he was portrayed. So the Buddha was not portrayed as somebody who went out to argue with people from other belief systems. He didn't seek out argument and debate. However, when they would come to him, he would debate them. He seems to, in that circumstance, have been interested in debate and to have been, indeed, accomplished at it, which at least implies that he'd had some experience in it. And when he was debating people from other belief systems, he was clearly interested in consistency and in justificatory accuracy. That is, he wanted to know how people would justify their positions. Why did they believe what they believed? Did they believe it simply because they read it from a book, or at the time, maybe not a book, but had heard it from a teacher, or had they experienced it themselves? So in two suttas, the Upali Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya and the Siha Sutta of the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha is faced with people from other belief systems, in particular Jains. Jainism was another religion at the time, or another belief system, which would become a religion over time. That was a competition to early Buddhism and to the Buddha's Dharma. These people came to the Buddha as Jains to debate him. And both Upali and Siha were supposedly very, very senior people within that tradition, within their tradition, people with lots of followers. So it was a big deal when they came to debate the Buddha. And in both cases, they ended up converting. They ended up deciding that Jainism was not correct and that the Buddha's Dharma was actually better or more accurate. So they were, in other words, new converts to the Buddha Dharma. And the question is then, how did he approach them as converts? What did he tell them to do as converts, the first things? And there were two things, and I think both of them are interesting. The first thing he told them to do was pause a bit and investigate this new Dharma thoroughly. In other words, they said, oh yes, we're really, we agree with you, we want to follow you, we want to follow your tradition. And the Buddha basically said, wait a second. Investigate thoroughly what I'm telling you. Don't just take it all on board at once. And I think it's interesting because he might very well have said something quite different. He might have said, take everything I'm saying on faith. You're part of my group now, take it on faith, and just follow what we're doing and you'll be fine. Instead, what he said was, back up and investigate. Try to learn what I'm saying. After you've investigated, if it still looks good, then you'll know you're doing the right thing. The second thing he told them, which is also very interesting, and in certain ways even more interesting, was that these new converts should continue to give alms, to give donations of food and everything else to their old teachers. Because in these cases, these people had both been long-time donors to their old teachers and the people in their older tradition. Their families have been donors for many, many years. And so instead of telling them to reject the old views entirely and to turn their backs on their old teachers and the people from their old tradition, the Buddha's advice was to keep donating to them, to keep giving them alms. And while the Buddha doesn't describe in detail why he thinks this, I think we can come up with some pretty clear reasons from his point of view. That is, doing this, continuing to be beneficial to the old tradition, it creates harmony. it lessens strife. It tends to dissipate this mentality of winner and loser that oftentimes occurs between people of different traditions. This notion of a zero-sum game, that if I win, you've got to lose, or if you win, I've got to lose. I think the Buddha was subtly trying to turn away from that kind of view towards a view of more inclusion. In a different sutta, the Dana Vacchagotta Sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha also makes the same point. That is, the person, Vacchagotta, comes up to the Buddha and asks, I've heard people say that you claim only to give to you and not to anybody else. And the Buddha says this is not correct. What he says is that giving in general is good. It's good no matter who you donate money to. If you donate money to anybody, you're doing benefit for yourself. And we have to think that in the context of ancient India, this was very important, because it was a culture in which you have wandering mendicants from uncountable numbers of different traditions, or people who were in their own tradition. Basically, they were the tradition, going around and begging for money, because that was how they sustained themselves. So what they had done, these people, these wandering mendicants, is that they had decided to put behind the household life of making money in order to try to discover philosophical or religious truths, wisdom about how to live a good life. But in order to do that, in order to have time to do that, they had to rely on lay support for their food and their lodging, their clothing and their medicine, as was the case with the early monastics in the Buddhist tradition. But the question was, were you going to be exclusivist? Were you going to say, I'm the only one out here who's worthy? And clearly the Buddha was not. In the Dakinavibhanga Sutta, which is a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha actually gives a long list of people who are worthy to give money to. And in fact, it's everybody. I shouldn't say money because it's not clear to that extent that it was money, but it could be food, it could be lodging, it could be clothing, anything. Just giving, being open to donate a possession of yours to somebody else. And of course, as one would expect, the Buddha believes it's best to give to him or to somebody from his tradition, but it's also good to give to people from other traditions, or people from no tradition, or just people in the street, good people in the street, or it's even good to give to bad people in the street, and at the very bottom, it's even good to give to animals. So this is the list, from the top being the Buddha himself, the bottom being animals. And of course, we may have our points of view about his scale here. We may feel it's incorrect or kind of silly. But the reason for it is that the Buddha did believe that giving to wise people was better than giving to unwise people, because if you give to wise people, the gift will be better used. So, for example, somebody who is wise will teach better than somebody who is not wise. We might also say somebody who's wise may put the money or the gift to better use, in the sense of perhaps giving it to people who really need it, giving it to people who need food or who need lodging. Whereas people who are unwise may put the gift to bad use. They may use it to do evil to other people. They may use it simply to buy drugs or something. So I think in a sense we understand intuitively that there is an idea behind it being better to give to wise people. But that aside, the main point of these suttas that I want to bring up is that the Buddha is saying it's beneficial to give to all and any. And in this sense, the Buddha was not exclusivist. And I think this has a very important upshot, particularly for us today, with the kind of religious and sectarian strife we find in the world, both between Buddhists and other religions, and within Buddhism itself, although that goes on more on message boards on the internet, and also between other religions, of course, and between secularists and religious people. We know that from experience in Europe and experience in the United States over the years. The Buddha's point was it shouldn't be either or. It shouldn't be either us or nobody. It should be both and. Both kind and generous to people from whatever tradition you think is correct. And you should be kind and generous even to those who you don't think are correct. And of course, while we may have our limitations financially and otherwise to actually give objects, we shouldn't have limitations in being kind and considerate to one another. So in summary, the Buddha's very surprising advice, I think, to new converts was, first of all, that they should investigate thoroughly the new tradition that they're that they're claiming to be converting to. It's not so much a religion as a philosophy. The Buddha was a teacher. And so they should investigate his teaching. And the second thing is that they should continue to have roots in their old tradition. They should continue to be generous to it, to be generous to the followers from the old tradition, and not to sort of cut them off or be mean to them. So I hope that that's been useful to you. I'd be interested in your comments and questions. Thanks for the ones you've already put up, and put some new ones up. Let me know what you think about this teaching, because I think it's very interesting and very unusual historically. And thanks so much for watching the video, and we will catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.